Welcome to the Hidden Orchard podcast, a radical exploration of spirituality, science, and the Bible from a Jewish perspective. Each week we'll look at a new topic and dive deep into the texts that inspire and enrich our lives. So whether you're a seasoned expert or just curious about a topic, there's something for everyone. So sit back, relax, and we'll get to today's episode in a bit. But first, if you haven't done so, visit thehiddenorchard.com and subscribe. It's free, and you'll receive access to content and weekly emails. There you can also subscribe for a paid membership and get access to everything on the site and be the first to hear about online study opportunities where you can meet and interact with other people on the journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have an idea for a topic, reach out to me at thehiddenorchard.com. Now, let's get to today's episode. Is the New Testament anti-Semitic? Scholars like Amy Jill-Levine would argue, though it wasn't intended, the texts have indeed been read to that conclusion. But who's to blame? Is it the authors for leaving out clarifying information? Is it the interpreters who failed to communicate the cultural, linguistic, and theological context? Or is it the readers? To answer these questions, we must be willing to confront our knowledge gaps and maybe some underlying assumptions. For some readers, there's no further context necessary. The simplest explanation is that the rabbis and the Jewish people have rejected Jesus and are outside the gospel's span of care. Many are simply unaware that there's more to the story. Unless you're Jewish or have some degree of Jewish affiliation or sympathy, what incentive is there to dig any deeper? For those who harbor anti-Jewish biases, the popular interpretations serve as a convenient confirmation bias. These anti-Jewish biases go back pretty far. We can find these sentiments by the mid-2nd century through Marcion and the Hadrianic persecutions. They become more prominent in the writings of the emerging church fathers, like Eusebius, John Chrysostom, and others. Many Christians often find themselves shocked to learn these ideas were forwarded by Martin Luther. Luther, projecting the corruptions of the Catholic leadership in his time, painted the Jews as the enemies of the Gospels. He saw fit to call for their persecution in his writings, and I quote, "I advise that the Jews, houses be razed and destroyed, and I advise that their rabbis be forbidden to teach, on pain of life and limb." As Protestantism migrated, it carried with it a virus, the virus of anti-Semitism. From the influence of Martin Luther, one can draw a connection to many powerful, influential, and anti-Semitic cultural icons like Henry Ford and Adolf Hitler. Street-level Nazi propaganda played up the ever-present tropes that the Jews killed Jesus, inflaming anger to recruit the citizenry into the persecution campaign. But where did they get these ideas? On this, Luther scholar Heiko Oberman states, "The terrible tragedy of the relationship between Jews and Christians in world history can be studied in concentrated form in the history of this one man." And he's talking about Martin Luther. So let's explore a few of the passages in the New Testament to see if there's any merit to this. Are these passages anti-Semitic? One major source of the era comes from the unqualified translation of the word for Jews. You can actually see the similarity when you track its evolution. John uses this word a lot, in fact 70 times in his gospel alone, and it's from John's writings that some of the most condemning statements originate. But context matters deeply. This word can carry a few different meanings based on the setting. It can refer to a descendant of the tribe of Judah, as we said, a Judean, someone identified with the socio-religious political party residing in Judea, in short, the Judean leaders, and sometimes it can be a general term for someone from the nation of Israel. And that's how it's used in modern times as well. But the nuance here is absolutely critical, and true understanding of the text hinges on a reader's ability to understand and apply the context. For example, here's John 7:1, where you read that Jesus avoided Judea because of the Jews. And it says, "After this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go in Judea because the Jews were looking for a way to kill him." Now, it should be obvious that all of his disciples were Jewish. Jesus himself was Jewish. His family was Jewish. So the logical conclusion in the context here would be that he's avoiding the Judeans, the Judean leadership, a particular nuance of the word for Jews. When left in the plain translation with no qualification, one could easily read the Jews, speaking of a people group. Another example is that the Jews persecuted Jesus. So due to the sectarian and tumultuous nature of the first century, argumentation, especially in practical observance, became somewhat of a common facet of ancient Israeli society. And we've unpacked this numerous times and recently in a 2-part series on our YouTube channel. But at times the rabbis spoke harshly to each other when engaged in Torah disputation. The Talmud records these examples and also discourages them to the future generations. And we can't forget that Jesus himself has a few zingers in the Gospels. But for John, his writings reflect his growing frustration as his communities incurred the wrath of the Judean leaders. Likely afraid of the apostolic community's increasing influence and their potential to stir conflict with the Romans, the Judean leadership attempted to persecute the way into submission. John 5:16-18 gives us a very common passage that's misunderstood. And it says, "Because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews began to persecute him. They tried all the more to kill him." Now, anyone with zero interest in looking at the nuance would accept that at face value, that the people known as Jewish people are persecuting Jesus, trying to kill him. Again, as the apostolic communities were comprised nearly entirely of Jewish people, to read John's words as an indictment against all Jewish people would be an egregious error. Another example people point to is the synagogue of the Jews. In Acts 13:5, Paul visited a synagogue of the Jews. We might ask, were there other types of synagogues in ancient Rome? It's more accurate, again, that this was a synagogue with a particularly Judean influence and some degree of governance structure that tied back to Judea. This adds insight into the varied leadership structures of diasporic synagogues, and why some might have been more open to Paul's message than others. Lastly, another example we're going to look at is the term sons of Satan. In Acts 13, Paul encountered a man named Elymas, who was Jewish and a magician. Paul called him a son of Satan. In Acts 13:10, he says, "You are full of deceit and wrongdoing, you son of Satan." Jesus lays a similar insult against some of the Judeans in Jerusalem. And if you read John 8:31, it specifically tells us that he's speaking to Judeans. John 8:44 says, "You are of your father, Satan, and your will is to do your father's desires." This phrase can actually be found in the Talmud, where someone from the Pharisaic school of Hillel referred to a Pharisee of the school of Shammai as the firstborn of Satan. Though not very nice, this use is intra-rabbinic and relatively benign. In no way is the rabbinic usage warranting anti-Semitism. And we can find examples of this in the writings of later theologians, but Martin Luther wrote, "They are the devil's children damned to hell." And again, that's in his work on the Jews and their lies. So this episode is in no way exhaustive of the many interpretive biases that have been seared into the English translations of the New Testament. To answer the opening question, is the New Testament anti-Semitic? It seems perception is reality, and reality is in the eye of the beholder. While many New Testament scholars have begun to overturn these translations, the lag time of acceptance will prove to be an obstacle to lasting change. In other words, the damage is done. The initial writings of the apostles were not meant to be anti-Semitic, but here we are. The best we can do is dig deeper, ask questions, and share this truth with as many as will listen. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this topic. Remember, you can find more information at thehiddenorchard.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. We don't really engage in marketing, so it's word of mouth and references like that really help spread the word. Also, I want to say thank you to those who subscribe to the site and those who support the Hidden Orchard Project financially. Without you, it wouldn't be possible, so thank you. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.